And we use this recording because we have a YouTube channel, so you can view this again, you can share it with others. A goal of our Mobility Monday series is to just help get information out to as many people as possible. And we will be reserving time at the end of this presentation today to answer any questions that you have. So the presentation will be roughly about 30 minutes. And then if you have any questions or discussion topics that you'd like to bring up, feel free to put it in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will absolutely reserve time to have that dialogue, which will be fun. I do want to introduce a few other folks that we have on the call from Circulate. So Octavio, if you want to wave, is one of our planners, as well as Angelica, and she will be our expert speaker today. But for those unfamiliar with Circulate San Diego, we are kind of a two-branch organization of both policy and planners, and we work together to cover a large variety of mobility topics. And one that we're really interested and passionate about is women's mobility. So before I turn it over to Angelica to get us started today, we do have a really quick poll. We just want to know who is with us today. So I'm going to launch this poll and leave it up about 30 seconds or so, but we just want to know if you work in transportation, if that's your profession, if you're a community advocate, or perhaps you're just an interested resident or student. And I don't typically have the ability to see the results, but I do today, which is great. Okay, I'll leave it open just a second more. So it looks like pretty good split. So about 43% work in transportation. And then we have a couple people as advocates and a couple people as interested residents and students. So thanks for that. So without further ado, what I will be doing is passing over to Angelica to get us started with our third Mobility Monday series. So Angelica, thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, Angelica Rocha. I am an associate planner at Circulate San Diego. As Jana mentioned, Circulate's mission is to enhance mobility of all road users. And we do focus a lot on vulnerable road users. And so often grouped in that category is women, and something that's dear to my heart is really understanding the different mobility patterns of women. And so I'm going to be sharing some research that we did with the City of San Diego's Sustainability Department, where we were exploring the vulnerabilities that women experience when accessing public and active transportation in the evening time, a concept that I'll refer to as street night friendliness throughout this presentation. And really what that means is what makes a woman feel safe or a street feel approachable and safe to walk, bike, or ride transit at nighttime. So just a run through of what I'll cover today. First, I'll talk about, just introduce the research, discuss the methodology that was used, and some interventions or recommendations. Okay, so first I'm going to read a tweet that was from 2018 that went viral. You'll notice the 81,000 likes at the bottom. So it says, women, retweet if you've ever walked through a parking lot with your keys between your fingers or pretended to talk on the phone because you felt unsafe. This woman, Caitlin, shared what she thought, she shared that her post she thought would get a couple traction and maybe she'd get 20 likes, which would be the most at the time that she had ever received. It was retweeted 68,000 times and 81,000 people liked it. And I think for the women on this call, this is something that we know is something we've probably experienced, and there'll be time for kind of Q&A, and perhaps if you want to share some experiences that you have all had. But as a woman who takes transit, who walks at night, who rides their bikes, or even oftentimes walks from my car, I think this is something I've known since I was a young girl. And so we asked 3 research questions. What are the barriers women experience when interacting with the built environment at nighttime? What factors influence a woman's perception of whether a street is safe or unsafe at nighttime? And lastly, what interventions might increase the likelihood of a woman using public transit at night? And I categorized what I wanted to find out and what factors influence women's perceptions of safety into 3 categories. So the first is visibility and lighting, street activity, And the last is mobility connections or trip change. So really I use this criteria to evaluate whether or not a street was night friendly. And the project geography and funding. So our research was partly funded by a SANDAG grant that was issued to the City of San Diego's Sustainability Department. The Move Free SD program was to support the City of San Diego in achieving Climate Action Plan mode shift goals. And so the thought was, by understanding the mobility patterns and barriers that women face, we can make more informed decisions on how to address those barriers of those who do not already choose to engage in sustainable transportation. And I want to take note of this because, you know, while we ventured through a series of different neighborhoods that I'll get into more specifically, I did want to kind of share that the experience that residents told us and the data collected is not always site specific. And it's important that we acknowledge that the varying mobility needs, preferences around safety exist in every neighborhood. And you know, how that might influence our ability to meet our mode shift goals across the region, and how we can make residents feel safer navigating the built environment. And I do also make note of this because we spoke with a lot of non-choice transit riders, or sorry, non-choice. Now I'm overstepping. Yeah, non-choice transit riders. These are people who are opting to ride transit, but they have the access of having a car. Okay. So methodology, there were two parts to this research, both qualitative. The first was a women's walk audit series. So we invited women to join us in a number of different neighborhoods to make an assessment of their built environment in the evening. The second was an online survey for residents to be shared. They sort of, our participants in the walk audit sort of shared this on their social media. We used other kind of groups to get in touch with residents who maybe didn't join us on a walk audit, but shared similar, wanted to share similar feedback. Okay, so the Women's Walk Audit Series. We had a total of 32 people, primarily female identifying, women identifying. We went to 4 neighborhoods. That was East Village, Pacific Beach, which is a picture of that featured here, City Heights, and North Park. And the neighborhoods that we went to are where we had existing partnerships with CBOs or community serving organizations and or residents. So I'll thank our friends over at City Heights CDC, Beautiful PB, and Uptown Planners for their helps in this sort of preliminary research. And again, most of the women that we spoke with were existing bike and transit riders and choice pedestrians. So I'll just share 3 quotes that really stuck out with me on this walk audit. And, you know, as you can imagine, there was some really interesting dialogue as we walked through these neighborhoods. The first is, I'm thinking how I get here as fast as possible. The second one is, the bus stop is scary. I would take the bus if it came more often. The third is, I would not walk down here with headphones on. And so just to kind of summarize some of the key findings. So this is on that first criteria that I mentioned, visibility and lighting. We found that lighting was the #1 concern in all 4 of our locations. In City Heights, the residents actually brought their own flashlights and headlamps with them for the walk audit because they already knew that they did not feel comfortable. There was not adequate lighting, despite the fact that we walked around in a group. Lighting type is really important. So lighting that we found on our walks mostly takes place at the intersection, which are those large overhead lighting, and that was perceived as really to be for cars and not pedestrians. While on one hand, we were in East Village and we noticed there's an increase of pedestrian scale lighting, but it was at the point where the street trees had actually grown to sort of block the pedestrian scale lighting, and it sort of created this dark shadow and created discomfort. The third is line of sight. So in areas where we saw bushes and hedges, we sort of asked how everyone was feeling, what they're sort of noticing in these specific places. And we kind of heard things like, well, you just don't really know what's behind you. I know that sometimes people sleep there. I'm not sure if someone's going to jump out. So line of sight is really important in terms of visibility. The next criteria is street activities. So here's some key findings from that. we found that there's a really big discourse in public space. So, in the daytime, there's lots of activity. And if there's no nighttime hours in this public space, it really changes to the evening time. Repeatedly, we heard that these were areas that women would avoid at night. These included transit centers, bus trolley stations, post offices, parks, grocery store parking lots. These all have one thing in mind, or one common thing. The sites experience high pedestrian traffic during normal business hours, but outside of normal business hours, they become dark, uncomfortable spaces with little to no eyes on the street. Secondly, we found that residential streets were often the most uncomfortable. This was a little bit surprising to me, but we heard several comments on the more residential streets that, that's where I got the comment, I wouldn't walk here with headphones on, that we talked about earlier, or I'm thinking, how can I walk here the fastest? And so it really indicates that eyes on the street is a key thing in women's perceptions of safety. And, also another thing to consider is that these dark corridors in neighborhoods, due to regulatory lighting requirements from the city and environmental groups, really does sort of affect the perception and trip chaining that often women take as they walk through neighborhoods. Sorry, there's some growling dogs in the back. All right, sorry about that. We have a new puppy in the house. Okay, and then the third thing was frequency of transit. So repeatedly, we heard from women that they don't take transit at nighttime. And then lastly, the desire for commercial area with activity. Closed and vacant commercial activity really caused fear, and really that they needed routes with activity to provide eyes on the street and increase comfort. And then lastly, the third criteria was mobility, connections, or trip chains. So here's some key findings that we found about that criteria. One, that crosswalks really aren't visible at nighttime. So some intersections we saw no crosswalks, while others we did, but oftentimes the visibility of those crosswalks was not up to the level that many of the women felt was safe and welcoming to them. We also learned that pedestrians waiting to cross at nighttime really aren't visible. So without pedestrian scale lighting, it's really hard to see people when they're crossing. And then dense areas, so tall buildings, make it really hard to orient yourself as a pedestrian. As I mentioned, we also sent an online survey. So we sent an online survey that we asked residents who joined in our walk audits to share on social media, and other residents in their community who weren't able to attend the walk. The data I'm about to share is from a really small sample size. It's only 26 residents because it was a really quick turnaround, but I do think the findings are interesting and kind of build on the results that we found in the walk audit. So the online survey, one of the big questions that we asked, what infrastructure improvement would have the largest impact on nighttime safety in your neighborhood? Again, lighting is the key thing. So we saw that lighting would make the biggest impact for 48% of our respondents. Frequency of transit was 16%, maintained and clear sidewalks at 12%, bike infrastructure at 8%, and nighttime businesses at 4%. And then another question we asked is, what safety issue is the most important in your neighborhood at nighttime? Again, we see visibility and lighting as the primary concern, and followed by street activity and then mobility connections. And then lastly, I'll just share, we asked, do you take public transit at nighttime? Why or why not? 30% of our respondents said that they do use public transportation at nighttime, while 70% that said that they do not. So we asked why or why not, and we categorized the findings into frequency of buses, safety, rideshare being a safer option, and then the length of the transit ride was too long. So what do we do with this information? What does a city look like for women? And what does street night friendly look like? And what might influence women's thoughts and feelings about public transportation being a safe mode of transit? So just to kind of summarize, visibility, crossings, orientation, wayfinding, increasing frequency of transit or bus schedule technology, line of sight improvements, and adequate lighting. So I'll just kind of go through this, and before we move on, I'll just say that in developing recommendations, I wanted to discuss and recommend some low-cost interventions all the way to, you know, higher CIP type projects or capital improvement projects. So the first is safe routes to activities. So what if we transformed these barriers that are often vacant, or we heard from women that they were, you know, perceived as dangerous in the nighttime, despite the fact that there was high volume of pedestrian traffic in the daytime. And what that really means is thinking through, you know, safe routes, what it means for a pedestrian to travel down the street, and activities. So we see businesses, we see, you know, other sorts of vibrant efforts that could be done to really transform this vacant space. Visible crossings, you know, painted crosswalks, certain colors may be more visible in the evening time, or adding more details could really have a car see it for further away and approach the crossing much slower. Wayfinding. So this is an example that I found from an organization called LA Moss, and they use this low-cost project to provide a range of strategies to enhance safety experience along Avalon Boulevard, I believe. And so these are physical design interventions, and these wayfinding strategies use images and numbers, which really offer, you know, more inclusivity, and it enhances the safety, both, you know, actual and the perception of, and encourages pedestrians to use. Increased frequency of transit. So while frequency of transit is one of the #1 reasons why choice riders share that they do not ride at night, I recognize that this is a costly intervention, right? Adding more buses to the fleet, adding more staff to ensure that they're running on a higher frequency, it takes a lot of work. So, but I think that you can also think of this effort as, you know, something that ties into the lighting discussion. So I've shared that a bunch of times in this presentation, that lighting's the #1 thing. And if increasing, you know, frequency of transit itself is too costly, we need to think of other ways to improve the rider's experience or perceptions of safety for that onboarding experience. You know, methods such as improving lighting at a transit stop or improving real-time transit data applications are tools for reducing the time spent at the transit stop, where we heard that women feel very vulnerable. Line of sight improvement. So a female architecture firm in Barcelona recommends to their city as an environmental design guideline that bush and thick vegetation be less than 3 feet high. So what that it does is ensures that people can see over it. So this is an image from Google Earth, though it's a place that we went to that once we were standing right here, women expressed a sense of feeling really vulnerable because they couldn't see directly inside, or they couldn't see around this vegetation here. And then just, you know, in some circumstances where line of sight can't be improved, a recommendation to make things friendlier could really go a long way. So this image is just stolen off Google Earth, but as we did the North Park walk on it, if many of you are familiar with North Park, a lot of construction's happening there. There's a lot of plywood walls, a lot of these railings that you really have to walk through, and women really reported a sense of fear in these places. And I think, you know, thinking about some low-cost interventions that really make a street more friendly for women, make the street more friendly for all of us. So thinking about ways to really enhance the pedestrian experience, especially in times of construction, is really important. And then adequate lighting. I know that I've said this a number of times, we heard this throughout the city. Lighting is the #1 issue. So we see a number of different lighting interventions here, kind of lining up the building, which removes the kind of dark shadows that the building can project, keeping lighting in the open space, lighting that lights up to the pedestrian just above their head, really can make a huge difference versus kind of the large lighting that's typically at our intersections. And as mentioned, you know, safety can be addressed in a number of ways. So on the left-hand side, there's some quick builds, often low-cost interventions, while others involve more planning and infrastructure improvements. And so just to summarize, I think that, you know, implementing safe streets for women at night is a multi-pronged approach, but it can be simplified through three things: quick build interventions, capital improvement projects, and really thinking about environmental design policy. So for example, I've given this presentation to the MTS Safety Committee and the MTS Executive Board, and this really prompted a reevaluation of bus shelter design that MTS uses. And so they're going to be restructuring that and thinking about how to design their transit for women. So, this research isn't over. This is just one kind of effort that Circulate put on to really understand the barriers that women experience. These do not, summarize all women's experiences by any means, but I think it's a start to really putting down the experience of our residents into paper and really giving it to decision makers to show them kind of how these interventions can be made and what would make the most meaningful impact to improve safety across the region. So without further ado, I think Jana has something a poll or something, but happy to also do some Q&A, and thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Angelica. Yeah, we're just going to launch a quick poll really fast. This is a grant-funded opportunity, so we just want to know if hopefully you learned something new today. If you don't mind completing this poll for us, and then we'll go into our Q&A. Excellent. Cool. It looks like 10 out of 10. Everyone learned something new. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Angelica. If you don't mind, perhaps we'll stop sharing the screen. We can all see each other. Hi, everyone, and feel free if you'd like to turn on your camera, feel free to do that. We wanted to first thank Angelica, such a great presentation. Thank you for sharing all of that. As you mentioned, this is not the first time you've given this presentation. You've met with several jurisdictions or decision bodies, which is really fantastic, getting the research out, getting your experience out. Curious if anyone on today's conversation has any comments that you would like to bring up to Angelica. Doesn't have to be a specific question, it could be a comment or just a discussion topic, but feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like. Okay, we do have a question in the chat from Alice, or I'm sorry, from Allie. Allie's wondering how to engage residents in improving lighting, so such as including string lights, and then also looking into murals. Do you have any recommendations there, Angelica?
So I will start by acknowledging some of the work that's been done in City Heights. So as I mentioned, that was the neighborhood where community members actually brought their own headlamps and flashlights. And that had to do with years of advocacy where this woman named Esperanza, I forget her last name, but an amazing woman in City Heights, and she had been organizing and knocking on people's doors, trying to ask them for support in increasing lighting, because I think probably what you're getting at is that it's really hard to get in lighting, but if there's community buy-in, it's easier. So I would just say that really trying to find a community champion would be one place to start. In terms of more of like the placemaking, sort of cheaper infrastructure improvements, I think residents are really interested in seeing that. I mean, we talk to residents all the time that are like, yeah, why can't we get a mural, or why can't we get a painted crosswalk? So it's, again, finding those community champions and then finding the platform for them to succeed, or getting in touch with the decision maker and really facilitating that dream into implementation. And there's a couple like placemaking permits and stuff like that available in the city that if anyone's interested, we can kind of drop into the chat.
Yeah,
I had
thanks. No. Oh, go ahead, Annapurna. Yeah, I'm sorry, one more, but it looks like Ali also provided a recommended link, so we'll check that out as well. Yeah, Annapurna, go for it.
So regarding painting murals and having some more lighting or stuff that is not all that expensive, it's little improvements here and there. Is there a way to kind of get a permit and engage the residents itself and kind of volunteering residents time to do like paint a mural, like a mural painted by the residents themselves, or some sidewalk or some crosswalks painted by the residents themselves, so that they feel more they feel closer to that improvement that they made and use it more. And also it's less time taking, because getting the administration to do that is, of course, you have to go through some red tape and all of that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Totally. That's a great comment. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to drop in the chat an avenue for making that happen. So the city of San Diego has created this permit process that's all online. But basically it's for placemaking projects. So what we're kind of talking about in this discussion, i.e. like string lights, murals, painted crosswalks, that's all considered placemaking. This idea of like really identifying the sense of place, increasing livability, and perhaps a bit temporary. And so this effort really allows you to go through the entire process. It's pretty easy, but I do understand like it can be challenging to navigate all the different hoops, but they've done a decent job of really creating bullet points of, okay, the first thing you do is, obviously you're going to need to organize your community and really understand what it is that you guys need, and really figure out what it is that you want, what sort of design and implementation, what that looks like. And then you're going to get a public right-of-way permit. And then you're also going to get a private, versus if it's in the street or if it's private property. So they're two different kinds of permits. And yeah, if anyone has other questions, I can drop my email in the chat. I'm also going to be applying for one of these permits soon. So if you want some community support, I can help you through that. But that's really the best avenue for taking initiative from the ground up.
And one thing I'll add there is I'm not sure where everyone's joining us from, but I think Angelica brings up a great point of what City of San Diego is doing. And one thing to note, that wherever you live, if it's in the county, if it's in a different city, certainly see if your representation has something like this. And if they don't, it's also a great example that City of San Diego has that you could use as kind of that conversation piece on ways to get placemaking in your community. So
thanks for that, Dana.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to, so Marissa, I appreciate your comment, just talking about it's great information and how these are strategies to consider for kind of diverse groups, universal design. And that's something that at Circulate we try and do a lot. We work a lot. I mean, this is one example of looking at women's needs and mobility, and then we also look at older adult needs and mobility. And we've recently been speaking with the persons with disabilities groups. And so just understanding that universal design is beneficial to all, but it's something that we really are striving to recognize more and talk about more. So thanks for bringing that up. And then I want to go to Faye's comment. So, and to the same point, thinking that if it's safe for women, it should be safe for all, which is, we kind of operate in that same mindset. So curious what's being done to promote and create public transportation in North Coastal San Diego. Curious, Angelica, do you have any thoughts on North Coastal?
I don't actually. I don't work with NUTCD really at all, so I can't speak on that. I apologize.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same. That's probably an area that we should reach out more. We work a lot with MTS and understanding that they are different regions, but similarly to my comment before, the work that Angelica has been doing with reaching out to MTS and giving this presentation and them kind of understanding how that can help adapt bus shelters and transit there. Perhaps the same thing can be done by meeting with our North Coast partners. So something for us to consider. Thanks, Faye.
Yeah, no, I'll just add one more follow-up to that if you're from the North Coastal area, would love to connect with you. We, just by nature, I think some of our work has been down here where there's, sort of higher density, but and Jana's been really good at really connecting us with people across the county, especially in the East area. And then the last year I've really tried to connect with more folks in Encinitas, in Solana Beach. So we're going to be doing, we have a project launching this week in the North County coastal area. And more in the pipeline. So if you're a community champion in that area, please, connect with me via email, and happy to see how we can continue to support that, because yes, totally, that traffic in that Torrey Pines area, North Coast area is insane. I went up to Encinitas and Solana Beach this weekend, and there's tons of people. There's lots to do up there, but yeah, these same sort of issues that we're talking about that happen in the city of San Diego are absolutely happening there, and would love to support you and your community in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Angelica. Curious if anyone else has any questions or comments. I do have one for Angelica. Okay, I will ask mine, and if others come up, please feel free to chime in, and you can take yourself off mute. This is a very informal sort of lunchtime session. Angelica, I kind of wanted you to think big a bit, and so taking all this research, what would be like an ideal next step for implementation? What would you like to do with this research and kind of big picture? It's a big question.
Yeah, so I'd like to expand the research. For one, I think 4 neighborhoods is a good start, but there's a lot of neighborhoods just in the city of San Diego, and then, as kind of mentioned, there's a lot of different cities in the region, and there's different needs depending on those areas. So I would love to do a regional planning for women, or women's mobility research report. So we've tried to start communications with different cities to really advertise that this is something we've done, and it could easily be implemented either in the same sort of methodology or in an improved, more inclusive methodology. But yes, absolutely interested in doing some sort of regional effort for this. This Los Angeles LA Metro, which is Los Angeles Public Transit Agency, actually administered what is it called? Understanding How Women Travel, I believe, is the document. So if you aren't familiar with that, perhaps just Google Understanding How Women Travel LA Metro report. It's a really great report. LA Metro hired some really awesome consultants, like Pueblo Planning did some really unique outreach, engaging vulnerable road users, trans women, homeless women, non-choice transit riders. So I think there's not a ton of examples of this work, but I think this is a discussion that really needs to be happening, and we need something like that here.
Awesome. I like the dreaming big, and I think that's really important to kind of region-wide, to note that a lot of recommendations are sort of infrastructure based, and also understanding that throughout our region, infrastructure varies, sidewalks vary alone. And so some neighborhoods have them, some don't. Lighting, we all know, is a deficiency in many places. And so I think region-wide, we might get more holistic kind of feedback, which would be really great. And I did note that Faye had one other comment, thinking about involving the community planning groups in the city, which is absolutely something that we try and make sure that we reach out to the community planning groups, especially if we're working kind of site-specific areas, but thinking of much larger research, that would be great. And even thinking community planning groups in the county as well. Yeah. So we do want to pause and see if anyone else had any other questions. Okay. Well, we really appreciate you coming. This Mobility Monday is made possible through a grant, as they mentioned, and that's through the Office of Traffic Safety. And then we work in partnership under the guidance of the County of San Diego's Health and Human Services. And so just really appreciate the opportunity to share this research and have this time to answer questions. And also it's for us, it's how we learn from what interests from our partners are, which are you. So thank you for being here. We have one more Mobility Monday coming up. It'll be next Monday, and we are going to be focusing on persons with disabilities. So hopefully you can join us there and share the registration info. But with that, we will conclude today's Mobility Monday. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.